U.S. and British planes and ships have launched missile strikes in Yemen, parts of which are controlled by the Houthis, according to U.S. media reports. Radar installations, weapons depots, and missile and drone launchers. Houthi spokesman promised a large-scale response from the U.S. and Britain. Iran attacked a number of U.S. and Israeli targets in Iraq on the night of January 16th. Behind these lines from the news, the story is not fully understood what is really going on in and around Yemen. Who are the Houthis? Why did they start shelling and hijacking ships in the Red Sea? Why do the Americans and the British and why other Arab countries are not rushing to defend the Yemenis? How what is happening in the Red Sea could affect the whole world and be a step towards another big war. Let's go back a little bit. November 2023, the huge commercial Galaxy Leader, a huge merchant ship designed to transport cars, was empty and sailing from Turkey to India and crossing the Red Sea when an unidentified helicopter. The helicopter hovered over the Galaxy Leader, and about 10 paratroopers disembarked, who easily took control of the ship and captured 25 crew members, most of whom were Filipino nationals. The attackers are from the local Houthi movement, or as it officially calls itself, Ansar Allah. They drove the ship closer to the Yemeni coast, anchored it, and turned it into a local attraction. They started taking tours, visitors took selfies, and danced on the deck, and local students even celebrated on the Galaxy Leader. That happened on November 19th, 2023. The ship is still under Houthi control, and its crew is still captive. The capture of the ship and other Houthi attacks on ships in the area have forced major shipping companies to abandon shipments through the Red Sea, which could impact to the entire world economy. The U.S., U.K., and its allies have responded by launching Operation the Guardian of Prosperity to ensure the safety of shipping in the Red Sea. In a matter of weeks, the operation has gone from simple patrols to missile strikes on Yemeni territory. But to better understand what's going on, we're going to need a little more information. And so, Yemen is a fairly large state in the south of the Arabian Peninsula. Population of almost 35 million people. It's one of the poorest Arab countries. Most of the population is Muslim. In 1962, there was a military coup here. The royal dynasty was overthrown and a republic was proclaimed. In addition to the change of the state system, it also meant the end of the rule of the Zaydites, but not everyone in Yemen agreed with this. A protracted conflict between royalists and republicans began. Around the same time, in the south of Yemen, in place of the British protectorates, People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, or South Yemen. In 1990, North and South Yemen merged into a single state. Since 1978, Ali Abdullah Saleh was in power in North Yemen and then in the unified country. For decades, his regime was quite stable, but various contradictions persisted in Yemen, both political, economic, as well as religious, between the Sunni majority and the Shiite Zaydis living in the north. The latter were concerned not only about falling prestige and discrimination, but also about the spread of Salafism from neighboring Saudi Arabia. In 1994, a member of parliament from the northwestern province of Sada, named Hussein Badr al-Din al-Houthi, the son of a local religious scholar, announced the creation of the Ansar Allah movement. 10 years later, in 2004, he openly confronted the government of Yemen, accusing him of infringing on Shiite rights, corruption, venality, and collaboration with the U.S. A year earlier, the regime led by Ali Abdullah Saleh had supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which displeased many in the Arab world and gave al-Houthi reason to criticize him. However, at the time, the Houthi movement was too weak to seriously fight Saleh's regime. Also in 2004, al-Houthi himself was killed in a clash. After that, the movement was led by al-Houthi's father, and then his brother Abdul Malik al-Houthi. The group is called the Houthis after the name of its founders, but Houthi is also the name of an Arab tribe, to which the founders belonged. The Houthis themselves prefer the more generic, uncolored name Ansar Allah. The Yemeni Houthis have accused the Yemeni authorities of having foreign support, specifically Shiite Iran. The Houthis were also accused of betraying the interests of the Yemeni revolution, allegedly to restore the Zaydite monarchy in the north of the country. The Houthis denied these accusations and said they were for a Muslim republic, but a fairer one, modeled on Iran. Then, in order to put down the rebellion, Yemen had to enlist the help of its northern neighbor, Saudi Arabia, which is dominated by Sunni Muslims. A military intervention is launched, and for a while the rebellion is quelled. But the Houthis are fighting well, and the movement is not defeated. In 2010, the Houthis sign a ceasefire agreement with the official Yemeni authorities. The conflict comes to a temporary halt. The conflict stops, but in 2011, the Arab Spring comes to the Middle East. Governments are toppled one after another in the countries of the region amid protests. In Yemen, the Houthis support the protests against the corrupt President Saleh. A new round of confrontation begins, with battles, terrorist attacks, and shootings. As a result of one of the bombings, President Saleh is seriously wounded and after treatment in Saudi Arabia. After receiving medical treatment in Saudi Arabia, he, amidst ongoing protests, agrees to hand over power in exchange for lifetime legal immunity. He is succeeded by former Deputy Abdrabu Mansour Hadi, who immediately steps on the economic interests of Saleh and his cronies. In addition, the country soon begins to have serious economic problems, and then former President Saleh again decides to try to return to power. He decides to make a deal with his recent enemies, the Houthis. For 3 years, the unexpected allies fight together against the new government and greatly expand their zone of influence in Yemen, including taking control of the capital Sana'a. Yemeni officials have to ask Saudi Arabia to intervene again, but in 2017, Saleh changes his air again and declares that he now wants to make peace with the Saudis. The Houthis called it a betrayal and soon assassinate the former president. By now, the situation is roughly as follows. The Houthis control a third of the country, and this is the most populated part of the country, where about 70% of the population lives. International organizations and other countries do not recognize them as the legitimate government of Yemen. The recognized government, however, is in exile in neighboring Saudi Arabia, and in those parts of the country that are not controlled by the Houthis, there are a variety of forces at work. There are what are considered government forces and individual warlords backed by Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates. These forces periodically clash with the Houthis. In previous years, an entire coalition of Arab states, led by Saudi Arabia, has fought against them. However, despite the support of Western countries, they have had little success. The Houthis not only fought off the intervention, they also made successful forays into Saudi territory and bombarded Saudi Arabia, and bombarded its capital Riyadh with ballistic missiles and drones. Houthi drones have also reached the United Arab Emirates. Experts believe that both drones and missiles are supplied by Iran. Iran denies its involvement. Periodically, the parties to this conflict establish a truce, but war breaks out again and again. The humanitarian situation in Yemen is very difficult. There's famine in the country. People have trouble accessing clean water. Cholera is rampant. Cities are destroyed and littered with garbage. Millions of people are homeless. Both sides of the conflict have targeted civilian infrastructure and blamed each other for civilian casualties. In 2017, the Southern Transitional Council formed in the south of the country and proposed dividing the country again into northern and southern Yemen. They have taken control of parts of the country, including the important southern port of Aden South. The Transitional Council, too, opposes the Houthis cooperate with the government in exile. In 2023,
Он не пожалел денег и взорвал настоящий особняк, выкупленный специально для съемок. Интервью Бэй называет дом 40 миллионов, треть от всего бюджета фильма.
Researchers describe the ideology of the Houthis somewhat vaguely. It is not so much a religious movement as a national one. When they came to power, they talked about fighting corruption, social justice, and they talked about it as much as Islamic tradition. The Houthis strive to transcend both tribal divisions and religious boundaries, for example. They embrace and cooperate with Sunni Muslims. What the Houthis are strongly opposed to is Salafism, a movement within Sunnism that is prevalent in Saudi Arabia. Unlike more radical Muslim movements, the Houthis do not formally deny women's civil rights. For example, they have the right to vote or be elected. They even have women's security forces and Girl Scout troops, which of course don't sell cookies and shout Allahu Akbar, but human rights activists have repeatedly called out the gross violations of women's rights in Yemen, particularly in the West, have become widely publicized stories of little girls being married off. In 2010, a book was published in the West, 10 Years and I Am Divorced. It tells the story of Nujud Ali, who was given in marriage at the age of 9. She was abused by her adult husband. She managed to escape from him, file a lawsuit, and then leave for the West. In 2008, she was named Woman of the Year by Glamour magazine. According to Western media reports, the Houthis persecuted their political opponents, banned Yemeni journalists from writing and speaking freely, recruited children into their army, and set up a propaganda machine to spread their doctrine, as well as anti-American and anti-Israeli rhetoric. At the same time, in the 2010s, Yemeni radio stations continued to use Western music. Western journalists, including American journalists, came to the country to report on the suffering and problems of ordinary Yemenis. It influenced public opinion in the West. And when Saudi authorities were implicated in the brutal murder of Saudi-born American publicist Jamal Khashoggi, it raised the question of whether or not to support Saudi Arabia in their fight against their neighbors, and that viewpoint won out. And in 2021, the U.S. removed the Houthis from the list of terrorist organizations and effectively abandoned the armed struggle against them. By early 2023, it seemed that peace was on the way. Negotiations were underway between the Houthis, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and the UN. Life in Yemen didn't get much better, but there was hope. But all that changed again with the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel and Israel's military response in Gaza. Recall that Hamas, which Israel is fighting, also has Iranian support. Iran declares its goal to be the destruction of Israel. Now let's look at a map of the region. Here is Yemen. It's located on the Red Sea, and it's in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, also called the Gate of Mourning, which is the only entrance to the Red Sea from the Indian Ocean. At its narrowest part, the strait is only 26 kilometers wide, but at this point, the Houthis don't control territory on the coast. Their positions are further north, but even this is enough to attack passing ships. And there are a lot of ships here because it's the shortest route from Asia to Europe. Ships from the Indian Ocean enter the Gulf of Aden, go through the Red Sea, and then through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean. It's estimated that between 80 and 90% of the world's movement of goods is by sea, and this route is used to ship more than 10% of the world's maritime cargo, worth about $1 trillion a year. If you go around, you'd have to go all the way around all of Africa, which is an extra 10 to 20 days, extra fuel and crew costs. When in November 2023, the Houthis seized the Galaxy Leader ship, they announced that they were helping the people of Gaza to defeat Israel. According to them, all ships bound for Israel, or in any way connected to Israel. The Galaxy Leader was leased by a Japanese company and was en route from Turkey to India, but its owner is Abraham Ungar, one of the richest men in Israel. In fact, the Houthis have set up a naval blockade of Israel from the south. At the time this video was recorded, more than 20 ships have already been attacked in various ways. They're being hit with rockets, or drones, or attacked by speedboats. Many of the ships were associated with Israeli owners, or were bound for an Israeli port, but not all of them. For example, on December 12th, the Houthis fired a cruise missile at the Norwegian tanker Rinda, which was traveling from Malaysia to Italy with a cargo of palm oil. The missile strike started a fire on the ship. Fortunately, the crew was unharmed. The Houthis have said that non-Israeli vessels are not threatened by their actions. However, the largest shipping companies have announced that they will temporarily abandon shipping through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Oil company BP has also abandoned this route, and one of the first to suffer from all this is Egypt, whose economy is heavily dependent on ship traffic through the Suez Canal. But the economies of all countries involved in global trade for Europe will suffer along the chain. Involved in global trade for Europe. This sea route is an important source of hydrocarbon supplies from the Persian Gulf countries. The value of this route has increased after the war in Ukraine and the rejection of Russian oil and gas. For consumers around the world, a crisis in the Red Sea will mean higher prices and delayed shipments of goods. For producers, overflowing warehouses and the need to cut production. The U.S. can be considered a major beneficiary of global trade. In December 2023, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced that America was launching Operation Guardian of Prosperity in the Red Sea, and an international coalition was formed for this purpose. But it went wrong straight away. Officially, 21 countries are participating, with 10 of them anonymously, without disclosing it. For example, the Indian destroyer Kolkata has appeared nearby, although India has not officially announced its participation in the operation. France, Italy, and Spain refuse to participate in the coalition because of the cost of the operation. Because the Houthis are attacking the ships with cheap Iranian Shahed drones, costing about $25,000 apiece, and they have to shoot them down with anti-missile missiles that cost $1 million each. Saudi Arabia, which now has another truce with the Houthis, has not joined the coalition either, nor has the United Arab Emirates, but at least openly, because fighting against Yemen could be interpreted as supporting Israel, and in the current situation, even moderate Arab countries can't afford that. It's not the first time the international community has conducted joint operations in these waters. The international coalition's efforts against Somali pirates were generally successful here. They were also threatening maritime traffic in the area, and then 36 countries joined forces to tackle the problem. It worked, but now the situation is more complicated. The Houthis are much better armed than the Somali pirates. They rely on their own, though not recognized, but in fact the state, and have the support of influential and resource-rich Iran. The Americans have a formidable force in the region, the 2nd Aircraft Carrier Group of the U.S. Navy, led by the aircraft carrier Dwight Eisenhower. Britain has sent the u.s.a. Diamond, Greece, and Denmark. 2 notable shipping powers have also promised to send a warship each. The Houthis responded by saying they could sink American ships and submarines, and even launch several attacks with missiles and drones. But those were intercepted by the U.S. PRO system and fighter jets. The Houthis are a dangerous force with Iranian weapons. They have Iranian Tufan missiles with an estimated range of 3,000 kilometers. They also have their own Kahr missiles, which are converted Soviet SA-2 anti-aircraft missiles. There are barrage munitions and the Shahed 136, familiar to Russians and Ukrainians. In early November, the Houthis even managed to shoot down an American MQ-9 Reaper drone. The Houthis were also among the first in the world to use kamikaze marine drones. Recently, the Houthis have attacked several times the Israeli town of Elad with rockets, and they have partially succeeded. Cargo traffic to the port of Elad has virtually stopped, and insurance for Israeli ships has become many times more expensive. The situation in Yemen should be viewed in the context of the great confrontation in the Middle East. The reason for escalation is the war in Gaza. The war in Gaza is the cause for escalation, but Yemen itself is a territory of long-standing conflict, a proxy for the war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Each player has its own interests here, and it is important for the Houthis to consolidate their power in Yemen and show themselves as an increasingly formidable force. Iran, which is behind the Houthis, needs to weaken Israel and have a new leverage on the world community. They could also use a strong enclave under the nose of longtime adversary Saudi Arabia, and in a strategically important area of strategic importance to the world, at the entrance to the Red Sea. Saudi Arabia, for its part, would not want the entrance to the Red Sea, on the shores of which it is located, controlled by the unfriendly Shiites, but unsuccessfully fought for many years with the Houthis. The Saudis are in no hurry to participate in a military operation against them and are taking the position of observers. It's critical for Egypt to resume cargo traffic through the Suez Canal because it receives up to $10 billion annually from it. Without this money, a crisis could erupt in the country, leading to political instability. The U.S. believes it is important to support its ally, Israel, and to maintain the conditions for international trade so as not to damage its own economy. And European countries need to maintain a cheap channel for energy supplies from the Middle East and goods from Asia. India and China should be interested in the latter. The latter, by the way, has its own naval base on the other side of the strait in Djibouti, but has not actively interfered in the situation so far. This tension in the Middle East is favorable for Moscow. Firstly, international attention and forces are once again distracted from the war in Ukraine. Secondly, oil and gas prices are rising. Thirdly, The difficulty of navigation in the Red Sea makes it more difficult for Europe to refuse Russian energy resources and increases the value of transportation transit through the territory of Russia. The value of transportation transit through Russia, and fourth, you can habitually accuse the U.S. of fomenting wars around the world and criticize American hegemony. Although once again, before the Hamas attack, the U.S. was trying to establish peace in Yemen, and in the Middle East in general. In my view, the power that is actually constantly pushing the region to escalate is Iran. It is her proxy forces, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis that are constantly provoking more and more violence. The U.S. has deployed a new carrier group to the region and does not want to be drawn into a full-scale conflict, but after attempts by the Houthis to attack American ships directly, they were given an ultimatum to stop these attacks. And 2 days later, the Americans and the British launched their own strikes on Yemeni territory. They stated that these strikes are limited and should only reduce the ability of the Houthis to attack ships, but the full consequences of this is difficult to calculate, and defeating a decentralized and capable Hussein movement with missiles and bombs is unlikely. By hitting Iran's proxy force, the U.S. increases the chance of a major war with Iran itself, which many in the West see as the main source of instability in the Middle East. But it is not certain that Western society today is ready for such a large-scale war. Write in the comments your opinion about this whole situation. And I'm done for today. If you like the video, you can mark it with a thumbs up. If you don't like it, you can use a thumbs down. But please leave feedback under the video so I can make it up to you. Don't forget to subscribe. I wish you all peace. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.